Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. Hope you are all doing well and enjoying a good health. After a long time, I'm here with you with a new topic about cross-cultural communication course. And here our today's topic is what is translation and process of translation. So let's move to the topic. Here we have definition of translation and from where this term originates. We discuss here these two terms. What is translation? Translation is the communication of meaning of a source language text by means of an equivalent target language text. Translation is basically a communication, is a pathway of transferring a source language into target language. Source language is which it is to be translated and it is given first, and target language is that in which it is the text is to be converted, in which we convert, in which other language in which we have to convert our source text, or we may say original text. But it's compulsory that our meaning remain the same as equivalent to our target language. In our target language, next, ability to transfer style, tone, and cultural elements accurately from one language to another is called translation skill. Translation skill is that it's ability, it's type of ability in which we transfer our style, our tone, our cultural elements. Without cultural elements, I think translation doesn't exist. And without these three elements, style, tone, and cultural elements, translation doesn't exist. Number second, the English term translation. Basically, translation is an English term. It was first used in around 1340, derives from our French translation, or more directly from the Latin translatio, means transporting. And if we look at transporting, we convert one thing from other, we transport. Here, the concept of translation from Latin language refer us that translation is also like transporting. We transport our words, our one language to another language. So itself coming from the participle of verb transfer. Transfer also means to carry over. To carry over means to change, to convert into another thing, to change its position from another to another position. So translation is like this. Hope you get it. Next, key terms in translation. What are the key terms used in a translation? Without these terms, we can't call a piece of written or spoken as it is translated. Translation. When we translate national language into the international language, it is termed as translation. It is our misconception that we often call it translation, but it isn't a translation. Translation is to translate national language into international language, but we are considering it in opposite manner, that we can international language translate international language into national language, and we call it a translation. It is not translation. It is retranslation, which I will discuss next. Translation is the transfer of national language into international language. For example, we translate something in Urdu from Urdu to English. Here, English is our foreign language or international language, and Urdu is our national language. And we are often calling this as a translation, but it is not translation. It is a retranslation. Translation is that when we translate Urdu to English, that is translation from national language to international language. Next, retranslation. If we translate the international language into the national language, It is called retranslation. Same thing I have told you about later, that we often consider it as translation. This thing point to be noted here: translate the international language into national language. It is called as retranslation. Source language and source text. What is the source language and what is source text? We often don't know about it. The first language is called as source language, and related text is called source text. It is very important to know about source language and source text. Source language and source text is that in which we have to convert the given, you simply consider it as a given language, is called source text and source language. Next, over we have target language and target text. The language into which we translate is known as target language, and the related text is also called target text. It is easy to understand, easy to comprehend, that the in which we have to ask to convert this into English, and convert this text into Spanish or French, and that language will be our target language and our target text, and that text will be our target text. Okay. Interpretation. What is interpretation? If pattern adopted in a spoken English, the process of translation is called interpretation. Interpretation is basically the adopted in spoken language. It can't be a written. It can't be in a written pattern. It is always in a spoken language. When we, in other words, when we translate our things, we're going to tell some people, and we're explaining them. We are comprehending them, making them comprehend. Then that thing is called interpretation. We are generally interpreting the thing, and the person who doing this job is called as interpreter, and the person who is doing this job, who's making us understand, who is comprehending us, the thing he's speaking about, he's understanding us, that person is called is interpreter. Hope you have understand all these concepts, because without these concepts, this can't help you. So you have to understand these concepts a lot of times while doing translation. This will really help you a lot in your study. So next we have categories of translation. A Roman Jacobson was a linguist. He gave us 3 categories of translation. So let's discuss them. In his seminal paper on linguistic aspects of translation, the Russo-American linguist Roman Jacobson makes a very important distinction between 3 types of written translation, namely interlingual translation, intralingual translation, and inter-semiotic translation. Interlingual translation means that translation of that type which is under different languages. Intralingual means within the same language, and intersemiotic means within the same verbal, or within the from one verbal sign to another verbal signs. So let's discuss them in a detail. Intralingual translation. First we have intralingual translation or rewording. It's another, in other words, we call it as rewording or rephrasing. Is an interpretation of verbal signs of the same language. In this, we interpret verbal signs. verbal signs which are written, which may be written or maybe oral verbally, we call them, and signs which indicate us, which tells us the meaning, but in written or in oral. Verbal signs of the same language mean of the same language. You may also call this type as a rephrasing, or in this we should really we should have a real vocabulary or synonyms when we are doing this job. Interlingual translation, it's easy to comprehend. Next we have interlingual translation or translation proper. This type of translation is called as a proper translation, in which we follow the pattern adopted by translating properly. So we call it as a proper translation. Is an interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other language. We have talked about that in interlingual translation of the same verbal signs of the same language, and here we are talking that interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other, not same, some other language. Sorry, I've called it same. It's not same. It's some other lingual language. Inter-Semiotic Translation or transmutation is an interpretation of verbal signs of non-verbal sign system. In this type, we translate or we interpret verbal signs by means of non-verbal sign system. Non-verbal sign system, the help of non-verbal sign system, we interpret verbal signs. So hope you did get from a lot from it. Otherwise, if you have any query, you can ask me in a comment section. I'll tell you in my next video, in my very next video. And thank you, and Allah Hafiz. Subscribe my channel, like.